Hello and welcome to Outlook on Air. This podcast is designed to keep you connected with all things Outlook, with special emphasis on our enrichment program and its many activities and services. On this podcast, we'll hear from Outlook associates, donors to our many programs, clients of our services, and much more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this edition of Outlook on Air. Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another edition of Outlook on Air from the Palatial Podcast Studios here at Outlook Enrichment. Dennis Nelson, your host. So good to be with you, and we have a jam-packed podcast, as always, for you with all kinds of information, and can't wait to get it to you. Let's start with a few of those odds and ends that we always have on podcasts, kind of catching you up on a few things and sharing a few opinions and all that kind of fun stuff. Now, this podcast is not necessarily the place that people come to for rumors. We don't specialize in those, nor do we want to. We, of course, want to keep you connected with all things Outlook and tell you exactly what's going on. However, there is a rumor that is permeating the internet right now, and I thought I would at least address it from my perspective at this point. And the rumor is that one day we are going to trade our iPhones for Pi phones. What in the world is a Pi phone? Well, according to the internet, which makes it true right there, right? Anyway, according to the internet, Elon Musk is supposedly working on a Pi phone that would use his Starlink satellite capabilities and many smartphone types of applications and things to create what he calls a Pi phone. However, when asked about it directly, he says, I have no interest in getting into the smartphone industry at this time unless the App Store or other issues would propel me to do so. So it doesn't sound like this Pi phone is anything you can look for in the near future at all. You might hear about it, and he may be experimenting and trying some things out with it. But as far as actually making it available and all that kind of thing, no, not yet. Not yet. And I could see where this could go either way. He might decide to do it, and we may very well trade our iPhones for Pi phones at some point. But it is not anything that's going to happen in the relatively near future. And if you hear such things, keep an ear open, but they're not out there and they're not being mass-produced at this point. So nothing to worry about in that regard at the moment. If that changes, of course, we'll do our very best to keep you updated on it. But I wanted to quash that rumor while I had a chance here, just because some people are saying, hey, I hear you can get a Pi phone. No, you cannot at this point. So we'll see. We'll see where all that goes. Technology is changing every 5 minutes, so you know how that is. Another thing that has come up in the past couple of months here, I've gotten a number of different inquiries about podcasts regarding blindness. And I would say to you what I've said to people who have made such inquiries. I would do searches on your favorite podcast apps for blindness-related podcasts using different keywords like, living blind or, I don't know, you could probably come up with your own list. You probably don't need me to do that, but you could try different things, living with blindness or things of that sort. And one caller in particular that contacted me wanted a podcast that would tell him how to do all kinds of daily tasks and things of that sort. And chances are fair that something like that is out there. There are so many podcasts available, and you really almost have to do a search now to see if any of them possibly meet your needs and what you're looking for. And as I told this particular caller who was, quite insistent on wanting to find some podcast like that, I said, if nothing else, although it would take some major consideration on your part, you may want to even consider starting your own podcast that addresses your issues for sure and maybe would help others. there's always room for someone else to enter the fray, if you will. So something to think about, that's for sure.
You're listening to the Outlook on Air podcast, and the guests just keep on coming.
Stacy Cervenka is a visually impaired parent, along with her blind husband, raising sighted children. Stacy joins us now to share her journey with us and to tell us about her latest book that she's written on the subject, which I think can be quite an inspiration to a lot of different people in a lot of different walks of life. And Stacy, welcome to the Outlook on Air podcast.
My name is Stacy Cervenka, and I currently work as the director of the Iowa Department for the Blind, which is Iowa's blindness VR agency. I actually live with my husband and kids in Lincoln, Nebraska. We're hoping to move to Iowa this summer, but currently I commute back and forth from working in Des Moines during the week and being with my family in Lincoln on the weekends. So it's extremely busy. My husband and I both happen to be blind, and our children, Leo, who is 12, and Josephine, who is 8, are both sighted. And they keep us extremely busy with lots of activities and school and it's a pretty busy life.
I would imagine just the commute alone, having to go back and forth and be away from them, that's got to be fun.
It's really hard. Right now, I'm very lucky. It's only a 3-hour drive, and so I usually go home on Thursday nights, and then I work from home on Fridays most weeks. And so I'll see Greg and the kids from Thursday night to Sunday night, and then I'm back here in Des Moines from Sunday night to Thursday night. So, it's difficult, but as my husband and I are always reminding each other, this is just a season, it's temporary, and I look forward to when they can move to Iowa.
Yeah, I'll bet. I can only imagine. Can you talk a little bit about your vision loss? You mentioned you were totally blind. Now, was this something that you were born with, or when did you start to lose your vision?
Well, I'm not totally blind. My husband is totally blind. I do have a small amount of sight in my right eye. I was born with optic nerve hypoplasia, which means that my optic nerves are not, in my left eye, my optic nerves are not connected to my brain. So my eye is not connected to my brain. So I describe it to people as like, what do you see with the back of your head? Like right now, what would you say that your elbow is seeing? That's what my eye sees. It doesn't see darkness. It doesn't see. And then my right eye, I have a small amount of sight. I used to have a little bit more when I was growing up, but I lost quite a bit of it in college. And so, I use pretty much, a lot of the alternative techniques that blind people use.
Now, from what I understand, you wrote a book. You might want to talk a little bit about that. What's the book called, and what inspired you to write this book?
Well, the book is a middle grade novel called Roxie in Color, and it's really geared toward kids in kind of 5th through 8th grades. I wrote it with Diane DeBrosner, who is the former deputy editor of Parents Magazine. In 2008, Diane was writing a feature on parents who are blind, and she reached out to about a dozen blind and low vision parents. And her article was amazing. It became the cover story, and it won several awards. And so it really kind of introduced Diane to the blind and low vision parent community. And she really kind of took an interest in it and stayed in touch with some of the blind and low vision parents that she interviewed. And so she was aware that at that time I was the chair of the Blind Parents Group of the National Federation of the Blind, and that I did some freelance writing. And so she began thinking about writing a middle grade novel about a girl who has blind parents. And so she approached me and asked if I'd be willing to join her on that journey. And so we wrote Roxie in Color, which is about a 12-year-old girl named Roxie Glass, who is growing up on Long Island in New York. And she is moving to a new school, a new town, and starting at a new school in at the beginning of 7th grade. And she's a very sort of shy, quiet, artistic person, and very sort of sensitive, artistic temperament. And she's had, she has a very close family. She's had a very good childhood growing up very close with her parents. Has had a lot of experiences traveling and participating in extracurricular activities. She loves her little brother, Theo. But she experienced some bullying because of her parents' blindness. And so at her new school, she kind of wants to start over. And at first, she kind of wants to not let her friends know that her parents are blind until they get to know her first. And so in the book, at first, she's trying to keep those two parts of her life very separate. And in many ways, those two parts of her life are very good. She begins making friends at school, and, she continues to have a very close home life with her parents. Eventually, her friends do find out, and she and her friends, she kind of lets her friends talk her into doing something that they shouldn't do. And they get in a little bit of trouble, and Child Protective Services gets called. And now Roxie has to go from kind of wanting to keep her parents' blindness a secret to needing to learn to stand up for the people that she loves and to stand up against a system that often discriminates against parents with disabilities. So it's kind of about Roxie learning to embrace who she is, both as the daughter of blind parents and who she is as an artist. And she goes from kind of painting on her bedroom walls to entering the school mural contest. And so she kind of was like hiding and like doing a lot of things about herself sort of more privately to showing the world, who her family is, or, speaking up for her family and doing her art in a more public way and just kind of embracing herself as a person.
Wow. Yeah, sounds like quite a story. Was there a specific experience or moment that pushed you to actually share this story?
Well, I would say that as a blind parent and as someone who's worked with a lot of blind parents, I know a lot of the misconceptions that exist about blind parents and how those can actually affect people's lives in big and small ways. There are blind parents who, want to volunteer to help in the classroom and are, told they can't, or who, ask, invite neighborhood kids to their home, and maybe the parents aren't comfortable letting their kids come over for a play date at a house that's being supervised by blind parents. And so it can help on those sort of day-to-day things, but it can also impact blind parents in like over-involvement of the child welfare system or the family court system, or kids not having, being invited to play with other kids. And so it can impact, families with blind parents in a variety of different ways. And so I just thought, Diane thought, the more we can educate teachers and librarians and other parents and kids who are the adults of tomorrow about sort of the truth about what it's like to live as a person who's blind. And also, for me, it's equally important that we give blind and low vision kids good adult role models in fiction, because especially in Nebraska, even more so than in Iowa, there are blind kids who are the only blind kid in their county, the only blind kid within an hour of where they live.
Sure.
And so, and so for many of these, out in western Nebraska, and so if these kids never encounter another blind adult, how can they imagine what adulthood's going to look like for them? I know for me, growing up as a blind kid, one thing that really kind of struck me was that, my parents drove, and every adult I knew drove. That was part of being a parent. Part of being a parent is driving your kid around.
Yeah.
And so to me, it was kind of hard to, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a parent, but when I'm a parent, I'm going to have to be able to drive. Hopefully by then they'll have cars that blind people can drive, because being a parent means driving. And so, giving kids an understanding of what it looks like to be an adult with the vision that they have, with the disability they have.
Sure. What is the main message as people read this book that you hope that readers will take away from this whole experience?
Wow. Well, so for blind and low vision kids, I hope that they take away that they can absolutely be parents, that they can grow up and they can have careers, they can have jobs, they can get married, they can have children, that they can have an adult life that is similar to the adults that they know, even though they might choose they might do things differently. They might, choose to live in an area with more public transportation or not. For kids who are sighted, I hope that they see that blind adults are just like, in most instances, most like all the other adults they know. They're, kids who are growing up with disabled parents, their parents, there's a lot of the same dynamic that they experience with their parents. They want their parents to trust them. They want their parents to approve of them. They want their parents to be proud of them. They worry that their parents are going to say no to things that they want. They worry that their parents are going to not let them do something that they want to do. Occasionally they worry about getting in trouble. I mean, it's kind of the same sort of dynamic. And, especially like the adults in their lives, the librarians and the teachers and the parents too, I want them to, see that, adults who are blind are just like them. As Diane often says, we're all more alike than different. We do have different ways of doing things, and we do have different life experiences, but we can often really relate with each other on a very human level.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So who do you think you wrote the book for? Other parents, children, or the broader community, or everybody, or how does that work?
Well, so the book is geared, it's a middle grade novel, so it's really geared toward kind of kids, maybe 9 to 14, kind of that middle school level.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but yet, at that level, teachers and librarians and parents are sometimes still reading those books that their kids are reading, and whether it's to determine whether the book would be a good fit, or for teachers to as part of classroom discussion. So largely it's for the middle grade readers, but I think adults are really responding well to it as well. Sometimes adults say, you know what, I felt different when I was growing up, or my family was different. We were a different race than most of the people around us, or we were a different religion, or my parent had a disability, or I was raised by my grandparents and I felt different because of that. So lots of people who have families that are just different than the ones around them, I think, really respond well to it. We had someone who read it early on and said, wow, some of these chapters really resonated with me because my parents are immigrants and how they were treated. I think that a lot of people can relate to how Roxie is feeling.
Very interesting. What was the writing process like for you?
Well, so Diane, it was very unique because Diane and I, co-authored it. And so Diane had written sort of an early draft, and we decided that we wanted to develop some characters a little more. We took some chapters out, put new chapters in. We kind of split up the work where, we would talk about what needed to happen in a chapter. Like, okay, we're going to have a chapter where we need to introduce this other family that has blind parents. And at that chapter, what should we do? Okay, let's have them go out to eat at a restaurant. So what do we need that chapter to do? What's the work that needs to happen in that chapter? It needs to be that Roxie meets these new people and she gains a different perspective on having blind parents because, Charlie feels differently than Roxie does. And we want to show the reader that Roxie is not the only, person growing up with blind parents. We want to show what it's sometimes like as a blind person to be out in public and to visit a restaurant. And we want Roxie to have some experiences that are a little embarrassing, but then for Charlie to put them in perspective for her. So that's what we want to happen. So then in this case, I wrote that chapter. Mm-hmm. And, I had some parameters, and then Diane would look at it and say, here's what I would suggest. And we might, edit it. Same thing. Diane might say, okay, in this chapter, or we might say in this chapter, we're going to have Roxie and her friends sneak out of the house and at a sleepover. So Diane's going to write that chapter and, kind of all the dialogue, and then I'll look at it. We would kind of understand where we needed a chapter to go, and then one of us would take that chapter. So again, we might say, all right, in this chapter, Roxie's going to come home from the roller skating party. She's going to what do we need to have happen? We need to show that dad is really into rock climbing. We might want to, we need to have Roxie have a conversation with Charlie about the fact that she might lose her vision one day to retinitis pigmentosa. She might inherit it from her mom. So that's what we need to have happen in this chapter. And then I would write that chapter, and it, I had the freedom to kind of write the dialogue and figure out exactly what's happening. What happens when Roxie comes home? What's mom doing? What's Theo doing? And then Diane would look at it. So we kind of went back and forth sort of in that way. And then when we would make revisions, we would divide it up, and we would say, okay, we want to add this additional theme. So you do that, and then we need to take out something in this other part of the book. Why don't you be in charge of editing that? And so it was a lot of fun. We worked, primarily in Google Docs, and we had a lot of lists and a lot of checklists of things that we needed to do and who agreed to take them. And yeah, so it was a lot of fun.
Wow, sounds like it. Yeah, definitely sounds like it. Let's turn our attention a little bit to actual blind parenting, since that's what the book is basically about, as well as everything else. What has been your experience raising sighted children as a blind parent? That's what he's trying to spit out.
Well, as I mentioned, my husband and I are both blind, and our children, Leo is not, or Leo and Josephine are not. And, largely we've been very lucky. We have spent most of their growing up years living in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's a very great community. It's a wonderful community to raise kids. We've been very active with their schools. We have great neighbors. The kids have a lot of, friends at school whose parents sometimes will offer to, give them a ride on the way to or from a birthday party, or, sometimes they'll text me and say, hey, is Leo going to such and such thing? If you want, I can pick him up. And I so appreciate that. We're so fortunate to have that, because not everybody does. Or, hey, I'm at such and such event and I see Leo's here. Do you want me to give him a ride home? And I can't tell you how much that means to us. Not just logistics, how we love that people reach out to us in that way. That's just part of being in a community, and that's really nice. And we try to return that in our ways. And so we've been lucky, but of course we have had situations that have been, upsetting. When I first had my son, Leo, I had difficulty breastfeeding, and I was extremely tired. It was a long labor. I had been very sick during the pregnancy. I'd been on bed rest for the past parts of it. And I just, it was a long labor. It was my first time. I was miserable. And the nurse at the time was helping us a lot, our nurse that first day. And I thought that's just what nurses do. So I was just letting her help us.
Sure.
And then she wrote that our chart that we needed 100% assistance, and and if I'd known she was going to write that, I wouldn't have let her help us so much. I thought that's just what she was doing. And so then we, this was a teaching hospital. This was at UC Davis Medical Center in Sacramento, California. And I woke up one day, the day after I had Leo, and there was a semicircle of staff surrounding my bed. It was a teaching hospital, so there were interns and residents and attendings, and I don't know who else. And the head doctor said, we need to have a reality-based conversation. And I was like, oh no. And so I spent the next half hour with them, firing questions at me. And I was so tired, and I was in so much pain. And all I could think of is, this is the most important conversation I will likely ever have in my life. The outcome of this conversation determines whether I will be taking Leo home, or whether I will be, fighting, the family, the Child Protective Services or something. And so it was terrifying. And again, I was tired and I was in pain. And so they're asking me questions. And at one point the doctor said, well, I'm really glad to see that you've thought about some of this. And I thought, well, yeah, I've been, in this case, I'd carried Leo for 8 months. So, yes, perhaps I had given some thought to how I would be a parent. I didn't just amble in. And she was like, but, I want you to meet with the social worker, because we need to put together a plan so that we know that you can take care of the child. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So luckily, we met with the social worker, and she met with us for like 10 minutes. And she basically asked us, like, if we have a place for Leo to sleep and if we're on drugs, that kind of stuff. And she was gone within 10 minutes. And so, I mean, she did what she needed to do. She was called in to evaluate us, and she actually did evaluate us fairly and realized we were fine and nothing else happened, but it was so scary. And what that ended up doing was it made me and Greg, we didn't feel comfortable then asking for advice or help from the nursing staff. Like, I wanted to ask the nurses, like, can you show me how to swaddle again? Or, hey, could you watch me change his diaper to make sure, I'm all good? But we felt like we couldn't ask for assistance. We felt like the support that most parents feel like they can get from the nurses, like, we felt like we just have to hunker down and be quiet and get ourselves out of this hospital and just, let's just get through this next. Leo was a preemie, so we were in the hospital for like 4 days, and like we just gotta get through this. We just gotta somehow get through this and get home. And so that's a way that some blind parents and parents with disabilities feel, that like if you do ask for help, are people going to think that it's because you absolutely can't do it, or are they going to think that means something else? Where we all need help, we all need community. I mean, that's part of being a person. That's a human thing. And so that was terrifying. And we've been very lucky in other aspects, like where this has gone really well. Like, there was a time when Leo had a sliver stuck in his foot, and we just couldn't get it out. Like, there are times when we just couldn't, and he wasn't letting us, and it just wasn't working. And so I called the school nurse and I said, Leo has got a sliver in his foot. Would you be able to call him in and get it out? And she did. And she wasn't like, oh, she didn't react or overreact. She just was like, yes, I am the school nurse. Your child has a sliver. I am happy to get that sliver out for you. Like, and so that was kind of a support that we were able to use. And I feel like that's how it should be. We asked for the assistance we needed, and we got it. And so there are good experiences, many more good experiences than bad for us. Luckily, we've had experiences where, I was on the PTO of our school, and largely, I mean, from the PTO, I was, embraced, and I was a secretary, and it, went pretty well. But there was a time when, we were talking about who would supervise what club. And the principal kind of expressed, she didn't seem to think that I could supervise, a newsletter club. And we actually put some of that in the book with I know you're just such a busy parent. When it's like, well, everyone else on this committee are busy parents. And, you're asking, we definitely put some of the experiences that I've had, that other blind parents I know have had, that parents that Diane interviewed have had. So we incorporated a lot of that into the book. There's another blind couple in the book that are friends with Roxie's parents, and they have kids too. And the mom in that situation, experiences some employment discrimination. And if she's looking for a job in the recreation field, and that's something that happened to my husband. So we kind of used that experience. I kind of used that experience to develop Grace as a character. And, it ended up working out well for both the character of Grace and for my husband. My husband now works for Lincoln Parks and Recreation. He is the assistant supervisor of a recreation center. And so, for both the muse and the character, it worked out.
Sure. Oh, that's fantastic. That is great. It's good that you got it worked out. So it sounds like you've had joys and challenges along the way, for sure.
Absolutely.
What are some common misconceptions that you feel people have about blind parents?
Well, I think, first of all, some people are surprised that blind people can even be parents. Some people are surprised that blind people can even get married or have relationships. Certainly people often don't think that blind people can take care of ourselves. So, people don't often think that as a blind person you can live independently or you can manage your own life. So the idea that not only can you take care of yourself, but you can take care of a child is foreign to a lot of people. Beyond that, I think that there are misconceptions that, like, if there's one blind and one sighted parent, then clearly the sighted parent's going to be doing the large share of the work. And like I always say, every family is different. There are undoubtedly families where the sighted parent does do a disproportionate share of the work. I know many families where the blind parent does the disproportionate share of the work. I mean, it's like any other couple. Sometimes one spouse doesn't pull their weight or goes to work and doesn't help out around the house or works long hours. But, you know, I mean, I have friends who, you know, one is blind and one is sighted, and the sighted spouse is a firefighter. And so he often works like 72-hour shifts at the firehouse. So she's functioning during that time as a single parent. And so at that, he's a great dad, but, you know, he's not always around. There are blind stay-at-home parents where the spouse works and it's the blind parent that's with the kid all day. There are blind parents who divide up and sighted parents who divide up the chores. Like, you'll do the chores that are running errands and then involve a car, and the blind parent does more of the stuff around the house. But that's not even always true. Sometimes the sighted parent just happens to like to bake and happen to like to be a homebody, and it's the blind parent that, even though they don't drive, they want to get out of the house, they want to be up and about, so they do it. So every family is so different, like how they divide chores, how they just in general. And that's the same with blind families. As I've mentioned with my family, we are currently very unique. We're in a unique situation where I work in Des Moines from Sunday night to Thursday night. So my husband, who's totally blind, works and, you know, takes care of the kids during that time. So there's, you know, every family, whoever you are,
lots of different
unique ecosystem. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Lots of different situations. Absolutely. Yeah. What do you, I assume this is one of those things, but what do you feel that people maybe could better understand about blind parents raising sighted children?
Oh man. I think the two things that I would think of is that, generally speaking, blind parents are competent. Like all parents, there are blind parents that aren't great parents. There are sighted parents that aren't great parents. Largely speaking, blind parents run the same gamut, the same, you know, range as sighted parents. Blind parents it's not usually our blindness that stops us from being good parents or doing things for our kids. And we want to be included. We want to be on that PTO. We want to be asked to volunteer for the class Valentine's Day party. We want your kids to come over to our house for a play date. We want you to invite our kids to your kid's birthday party. We want the same thing that every parent wants. We want our kids to be included. We want to feel connected to a community of parents. All parents want to feel part of like they have other parents that they can lean on. So that, I mean, essentially just we have a lot of the same needs as other parents, that need for connection, that need for support, that need to be trusted in our own parenting decisions, whatever those are. On the same point, I think as blind parents, just like all parents, you know, we do appreciate when people reach out to us and say, hey, you know, I'm at the science fair and I see that Leo's here. Would he like a ride home, or whatever the situation is? You know, to me, that's part of living in community. And, you know, then I want to do that for you. Like, I have neighbors who, you know, they've had to take one kid to the emergency room, so they drop their kids off at our house for the night and spend the night with us. You know, or I've had plenty of opportunities to like babysit neighbor kids, like while their parents, you know, have something that they need to do, or, you know, even just run errands. And, you know, we want to return that favor. And so, again, I think that's just living in community.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Let's take a look at things from your kids' perspective. This will be somewhat your opinions, of course, but how do you think your children understand your blindness?
So Leo, you know, the 12-year-old boy, he doesn't share a whole lot with us. He kind of just, I don't think he thinks a lot about it. I can think of one or two times. I remember once when he was in kindergarten, we went to like an open house night, or we went to some sort of, you know, family conference night or something. And he noticed a friend of his kind of like staring at his dad. And then he said that he then whispered in her ear, he's blind or something. And then he told us later, he said, so-and-so was just, she couldn't believe it. She was staring at Dad. So I just whispered in her ear, he's blind. You know, he was 5 or 6 at the time. And so, you know, it didn't really, he noticed it, but he didn't, he told us about it, but he wasn't like bothered per se. He was just like, wow, she was surprised. So I told her, you know, what was going on here. And especially when he was little, he was always very proud of his dad. Like he would, you know, he'd be like, this is my dad, you know, to his friends. And he was very proud of Greg because Greg is big and strong and, you know, a great dad. And Josie, but Leo, I'd say largely when I had him read Roxie, because Roxie is just like blind people ourselves. Our kids are very different. I mean, they're kids. I mean, they have just as wide a variety of experiences as any other kid. And so when I had him, you know, read the book, there were times when I'd say, Leo, like, you know, Roxie's friends just met her parents and now she's kind of freaking out. Like, have you ever felt that way? Or what do you think Roxie's friends are thinking? And he'd be like, oh, I mean, they'll probably just think about it for a minute and then they'll think of something else. Like, you know, he didn't really think it was a big deal. Josie is very much a daddy's girl, loves her dad, talks about her dad all the time, always wants him around, you know, very, very much a daddy's girl, like loves showing off her dad. And so we haven't experienced them. Leo, for a while, he went through a phase where he didn't want me kissing him in public.
Oh,
He
sure.
went out of that phase. I mean, I don't think we've experienced anything unusual yet. But, I mean, I think part of it is just that, like, we've lived, I mean, his only school experience is here, so his friends have always known us. And so his friends have known us long before he reached an age where he might be more self-conscious. Because now in general, Leo's in middle school and he is more self-conscious. He is hitting that middle school age. But his friends have known us since preschool or kindergarten. So there's not really that, like, that dynamic that Roxie has of starting in a new school. So, yeah.
I suppose the move to Iowa might change some of that.
Could be. It'll be interesting to see, like what happens. I mean, again, I think because their experiences have been largely neutral or positive, it'll be interesting to see. But I mean, their experiences. We have one friend that was, and this actually made its way into the book. He had one friend who, my husband is blind due to a gunshot injury, and he had one friend who, you know, when he would see Greg walking around the house without his sunglasses, you know, he was a young kid and, you know, thought Greg looked different and kind of scary. And so, you know, but he hung around the house enough. I mean, he got over it. So, I mean, that's, you know, it'll be interesting to see. But I think partially because their experiences have largely been neutral to positive, I think I you know, don't anticipate anything huge.
Well, let's hope not anyway, but I had to ask you.
I mean, they'll probably try to hide us at some point, like I would.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we'll play it by ear. I'm willing to do that with you. So, yeah. Do you feel like your blindness has shaped their perspective, your kids, that is, on the world in any unique way?
Yeah. Yes. So when Leo was young, particularly, you know, he was always taking the bus. We were in Sacramento. He was, I mean, even at a very young age, he was always taking the bus with Greg. And so even when he was 2 or 3, he knew what number bus we would take. And he'd be like, oh, Daddy, that's our bus. And he knew exactly when his stop was, like the stop before his to get off. And we always used to say, even at age 3, he was kind of street smart. Like he understood a lot about sort of the world, like taking public transportation, walking around the city instead of being in a car. I think Leo really kind of had a lot of that. And I think the kids too, they're just used to, like, Mom and Dad don't drive, and they kind of grow up understanding that if we're going to go somewhere, we're going to have to take an Uber. And sometimes we might say, wow, that's too expensive. Or so I think, that'd be an interesting question to ask them. When I've asked Leo, what do you think about having blind parents in the past? He said, I think it's cool because one day I'll be a sighted parent. So I'll know what it's like to have blind parents and what it's like to be a sighted parent. So he kind of just sees it as, I think they definitely do because we have blind friends and we have friends with disabilities. And so I think they're around more disabled adults than they would otherwise be. And so they don't think anything of it. They're just like, those are mom's friends, dad's friends. That one uses a wheelchair and that one's blind. And they're just they're just exposed to it.
That's neat. Yeah. It really is. Are there any moments that you've spent with your kids that have really stuck out and stuck with you over the years?
Oh, so many. Oh, I don't know. All the moments. I do love seeing how it almost makes me want to tear up, but I do love seeing how proud they are of their dad. Like I said, he's, big, strong, capable guy, and they're proud of him in that way that some kids are proud of that, almost in the stereotypical way that a lot of kids are proud of their dads, like, oh, that's my dad, he's big and tough. There are times when I think kids say things that make me realize that they're watching me. I remember one time we were actually at the Henry Dorley Zoo, and there was someone that asked us directions, and I talked to him briefly. For whatever reason, he reached out to the blind folks and asked us directions. But I answered his question, and then I handed him. I had a park map in my purse that I'd been handed when I walked in, and I gave it to him. I said, "Oh, here, here's a park map." And Leo was like, "Mom, that was kind." And so it was like, okay, he noticed how I interact with other people, and whether it's good or bad, And I think just being aware that how I interact with people and how I, what an impression that you have on them, and what an opportunity you have to really sort of shape their views and their experience of the world.
Sure. Going back to your book for just a minute here, how do you hope that this book is going to impact other blind or low vision parents?
Oh man, I really hope that blind and low vision parents love it. I hope at first I was worried that they might be like, oh, why is Roxie embarrassed of them? But I think they'll understand that Roxie is in 7th grade and we're all kind of embarrassed of our parents in 7th grade. At one point in the book, Roxie's mom shows up wearing a fanny pack at school, and I actually remember being embarrassed of my own mom wearing a fanny pack. And one of my sisters was embarrassed that mom showed up at school wearing a jogging suit. And everybody understands sort of that, that feeling. And I think a lot of blind parents read it and they see a lot of aspects of their own life in it that they may not have ever seen in a book. Sometimes people will talk to me about the restaurant chapters and they'll say how true to life, wow, I've never seen writing that felt quite so true about blindness, just the little details. Or, in the book we talk about, why mom uses a guide dog and dad uses a cane, and how blind people don't like to be asked or told, hey, why don't you use a dog, or why don't you use a cane? And, that's not something I think that most people would think they would see in a book. Or even just little aspects of our lives that kind of make it into the book that I think a lot of blind adults are gonna resonate with. And, I'll say this though too. I think one dynamic that is probably common in a lot of sort of, underrepresented communities is that when you do finally see yourself or your community or a character like you represented in a book, you almost think you want that character to be exactly like you and to feel exactly how you feel and do things exactly the way you do them. So I also think sometimes when we see blind characters, we're like, well, that's not how I do it, or that's not how I felt. And we, it almost feels hurtful or feels like, whoa, that's disappointing. And So, I mean, I think it's also reasonable to expect that some people will see that mom and dad in the book are not them. Like, mom and dad are Penny and Joe. They're Penny and Joe who live on Long Island and are Penny and Joe. You know, they're not you. They're not me. And maybe they feel differently about something than you feel. But that doesn't mean that they're any less, capable or good parents or competent,
Sure, absolutely. So do you see this book as a way to maybe help bridge the understanding between the blind and sighted communities?
I definitely think so. I look forward to both sighted kids and adults reading it and understanding more about both what blind people can do, how blind people do things, and also how it feels to be underestimated. And not just how it feels, but how that can have a really big impact on your life. Like in this book, a neighbor doesn't think mom and dad can properly supervise their kids. And so she calls, and it's one thing for her to think that, like, that's too bad that she thinks that. But then because mom and dad are sort of in this marginalized group, she can call Child Protective Services, and that triggers an investigation.
Sure.
So,
have you received any feedback from readers that has been especially meaningful?
yes. One of the first ones was, like I said, there was someone at Candlewick Publishing who actually said that the restaurant chapter made her think a lot about going out with her parents who happen to be immigrants. And like, oh, okay, so like this resonates with people. I love it when I hear blind and low vision people say, oh, this really made me think about such and such thing, or have this memory, or I really loved that part. I think when people say that really made me think about something from my own life, or I've never heard it phrased like that, or I've never thought about it like that, I think that, I really like that.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great. So I guess I should probably ask you, why do you think it's important for stories like yours to be shared?
Well, in a lot of ways, I think number one, it helps to dispel some of the myths about blind parenting that can cause real trouble in blind people's lives. I think for kids, it helps kids who have disabled parents to know that they are by no means the only person with disabled parents. And maybe they are in their town or their community or, in their school, but that there are other kids who are growing up like them. I think for blind kids, it's good for them to see representation of successful, happy, active, blind and disabled role models, or not necessarily role models, but just representations of blind and disabled adults who are living their lives and doing well. And so, yeah.
So from talking with you, I'm gathering that you still feel there are some barriers out there and stigmas that exist for blind parents, even today.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, some of them are more like the systemic type stuff, like lack of public transportation, employment discrimination, inaccessible websites that we need to, register our kids for school or sign our kids up for baseball or sign up for the parent-teacher conference. Again, if there's not good public transportation, not affordable, accessible, efficient transportation, it can be hard to get our kids, and expensive to get our kids around to all the things we need them to get to. Greg and I, we often say we're lucky. We both have good jobs, and so there are a lot of problems that we throw money at that not everyone can do. Like, okay, we can take Uber. Like, we can take Uber several times a day. We can pay for someone to take our kids somewhere if we need them to. Like if Greg's working and I'm working, like we can, pay a babysitter to run the kids to gymnastics or something if we have to. So, I mean, we're lucky. I mean, I think that's sort of a class thing. I mean, when you have resources, you can manage some of the inconveniences of being blind in a way that most people can't. And we didn't always have, we were, poor young professional college students, grad students. I mean, so like this is, we've lived that life too, standing out in the bus in the rain or in 95 degrees because you couldn't afford anything else.
Sure.
So,
Do you have any plans to write another book, or are you just going to kind of live off this one and continue sharing these experiences that you've already chronicled?
You know what? We don't know yet. I mean, Diane and I, we've kind of talked about. We'll see how this one does, and if people resonate with it, and if they like it, we're definitely keeping our options open. But we would love to see. I think when you guys read the end of the book, I mean, it's a complete story on its own, but I think you'll see that there are some aspects of the story where people, toward the end of the book, where people might want to know what happens next for Roxie, and so certainly we're open to whatever readers want.
Awesome. Well, that's great to know that you're at least open to that. Are there other topics related to parenting and low vision and things of that sort that you feel still need more attention?
I think one thing in the book so Roxie's parents, they're very middle class.
Mm-hmm.
Mom is a psychologist and dad is, a software designer or a software developer. And so he, a lot of blind people are unemployed or underemployed. And so for their kids, like they discriminate, briefly in the book, Charlie's mom is having a hard time finding a job. And, so Charlie can't take art lessons. And I think, a lot of blind adults do experience employment discrimination or do have a hard time acquiring the skills they need to be gainfully employed. And that does impact their families. That does impact their children. So I think kind of showing maybe a little bit more about how the systemic inequality and accessibility and discrimination, how that can really impact a family and what opportunities that family has. Roxie, luckily, again, her parents have good jobs. And so she's kind of lived a middle class life. But certainly there are lots of kids with disabled parents who, do experience economic hardship and everything that comes along with that. Like, fewer experiences. So I think definitely showing sort of a more robust, it would be great to see more depictions of, Roxie's family is one family, and blind people. One thing that's interesting about people who are blind is that we're a real cross section of society.
Mm-hmm.
There are blind people in every geographic location, every gender, every ethnicity, every religion, every political persuasion, we're a cross section. And so I think it'll be great to see an even more diverse representation of who blind parents are. I mean, there are blind parents who, live in inner cities. There are blind parents who live on reservations. There are blind parents who are farmers themselves. There are blind parents who, are single parents, who are divorced, who have one spouse serving in the military overseas, who are part of multi-generation families. There are blind parents who are sharecroppers, or not sharecroppers, excuse me, who are, we know blind parents in California who are like seasonal farm workers. We're a cross-section of society. I mean, there are blind parents who are also immigrants. So I think, this is a good start, and I look forward to other people and, other writers and other content creators creating even more, a fuller understanding of who blind parents are.
What advice would you give to someone who is blind and considering becoming a parent?
Well, I hope you got a ton of money. I hope you don't sleep. I hope sleep is not important to you.
That's true with kids in general, though.
Yes. I say, okay, so first of all, this is good. Being a parent is hard. It's super rewarding. It is super rewarding. But make sure that you have your blindness skills in order, whatever that means to you, whether that's using a white cane or a guide dog, like having your mobility situation, figured out, making sure that you can use technology as best as possible, because you're going to have to, that's how you're going to enroll your kid for school most of the time. I mean, yes, you can also, but that's how you're going to sign your kids up for sports. That's how you're going to sign up for a slot at the parent-teacher conferences. That's how you're going to communicate with the PTO. I mean, having good technology skills, having good independent living skills so that you can volunteer in your kid's class. I mean, you're going to be taking care of a kid. That is it's a lot of work. It's way different than just taking care of yourself. I mean, you're constantly on when you have a baby. So just really making sure that you have your alternative techniques squared away to the largest extent possible. Again, really understanding that, and I think sometimes being a parent, just in some communities, it's almost like a status symbol, where it's like being a parent is a lot of work. Don't have kids just because your friends are doing it or because you think it's cute, or like you have to really want it. And yeah, I mean, I would just say just be as prepared as you possibly can be. Don't let people talk you out of it if that's what you want. If you want to be a blind parent, I mean, many blind adults are. I work at the Iowa Department for the Blind, and we have a lot of blind staff. And just like in most workplaces, most adults here who are blind, they have kids. And so you definitely can be a blind parent if you want to be, but just make sure that you have all your skills together and understand like what you're getting into, that it's a lot of work, especially when they're young.
I would say that you have already given a lot of this advice, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What would you say to a parent who is like newly adjusting to vision loss? Let's say maybe they're going blind and they've maybe been a parent and they're losing their vision. What would you say to them?
Well, I would say, first of all, you can absolutely still be a great parent. You can still be very active in your kids' lives. You can still have a very close relationship with your kids and give them the experiences that you want to give them. That being said, you're going to need to learn some alternative skills. So I would contact an agency like Outlook, Nebraska. I would definitely contact your state's vocational rehabilitation agency, because often they can help you with the tools that you're going to need, whether that's a screen reader for your computer, and they can help you with the training on how to learn how to use that screen reading software. Often it's your state's vocational rehabilitation department that can provide you with blindness skills training or can hook you up. One thing that's unique about blindness is that if you acquire almost any other disability, your insurance will cover it. If you have a stroke, insurance will cover physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, the types of, augmentative and alternative communication that you might use as a stroke survivor. When you go blind, insurance does not cover cane travel instruction or braille instruction or, learning how to use a screen reader or screen magnification. That's tied for whatever reason to your state's vocational rehabilitation department. And so even if you think you want to remain maybe you're a stay-at-home parent and you want to continue being a stay-at-home parent, I'd still urge you to consider reaching out to your state VR agency, as that's all usually where blindness training happens. And they can connect you with organizations like Outlook Nebraska and Outlook in Richmond, and look in your town. You may be lucky enough to have an agency like Outlook or a Society for the Blind or a Lighthouse that can help you in that way.
Sure, if you don't reach out, you never know. So I think that is very, very, very good advice, as always. As long as you're giving out advice here, what advice would you give to sighted individuals on how to be maybe more understanding or supportive?
Again, I think, you want to treat them the way you treat any other parent, with the same respect and with the same sort of fellowship that we all sort of experience as parents. Like, we also want to talk about how expensive childcare is, or how, hey, did you hear about the new teacher in third grade, or what do you think about this or that new school policy? Why are they doing that? Or, or hey, do you know where my kid is interested in soccer? Where's a good place to sign him up? I mean, you kind of want to have the same sort of support network of parents that anyone else has. My kid's interested in theater. Do you know of any programs? That being said, as blind parents, often transportation is hard. If you can offer a ride to our kids, often we really appreciate that. And also knowing that we want to contribute too. We don't just want to be, the recipient of endless charity. We appreciate it when you can give our kids a ride, but don't be surprised if, we show up with, a box of candy or I've done that. Or some cookies. That's something that Roxie's mom does too. Like, here's a tin of cookies. Or, hey, if you need me to babysit your kids for an evening while you guys go out or while you take care of something, like, I'm happy to do that too. So know that we want to be fully part of the community.
Where do we find the book and follow your work?
All right. Well, you can find the book. It's available through Candlewick Press. You'll be able to find it pretty much anywhere books are sold. You can go online and find the print version at Barnes & Noble or Target or Amazon. I mean, pretty much anywhere you buy books, you can pre-order Roxie in Color. It will also be available through National Library Service, NLS Bard. It will be available on Audible, so you can download the audiobook on Audible. And in fact, the narrator for the book on Audible is Ariamia Liberti, who is a blind. Do you know who she is? So
yes.
She was the blind actress in all Netflix's miniseries, All the Light We Cannot See. And then the voice of Nash, her mother's guide dog, is being done by Jeff Ebner, who has been nominated for several different audiobook awards. So he's a great narrator as well. I think he does a fantastic job as Nash, her mom's guide dog, who narrates about 7 chapters of the book. And, it will be available on Kindle. So it's pretty much available anywhere. In September, it will be coming out through a large book or a large print distributor. So it'll be available in regular print, large print, Braille, audio. In fact, the print version itself is actually printed in a font called Atkinson Hyperlegible, which was developed by the Braille Institute in California to be particularly readable by people who are blind and low vision.
Oh, wow. Very
and
neat.
I also want to share with any of your readers who have an interest and are in the Lincoln area, we have a book release event on Saturday, June 6th at Sower Books in Nebraska at 2 p.m., I believe. You can find more information on Sower Books' website or in social media, but that is Saturday, June 6th at Sower Books in Nebraska. And even if you're not thinking about buying a print copy, you're planning on getting it in Braille or something, we'd love to have you show up and I'd love to meet you and sign whatever copy of the book you have and talk with you. So I hope those of you who are in or near Lincoln on Saturday, June 6th, will join us at Sower Books.
Anything else that I didn't cover? I know I asked you a lot today, but anything else that you wanted to share? Any final thoughts, if you will?
I'm so glad that more people will be learning about, that blind adults have jobs and families and kids, and that more people will be learning about blindness and what it is to live as a blind person. And I really hope that this inspires more aspiring blind authors or filmmakers or artists or other people who want to represent living as a blind person or as a person with a disability. I hope that, this makes you feel inspired or encouraged to do that.
Fantastic. Well, Stacy, I want to thank you for taking time out of what I know is a busy day for you, being a parent and everything else, to talk with us and to share your story with all of us. And looking forward, certainly, to getting the book and reading it now that I know what it's called and where I can get it.
Well, thank you so much. I honestly really appreciate this, and I'm especially excited to talk with blind and low vision Nebraskans. I mean, it means so much to me to, have Outlook support and to share this experience with my own community and the blind community in Nebraska. It's, one of the most meaningful parts of me. Meaningful parts for me. So thank you very much.
Well, folks, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this edition of Outlook on Air, but we certainly hope you've enjoyed the program. We hope to see you back here again for another edition of Outlook on Air. And if you'd like more information about Outlook Enrichment or anything Outlook for that matter, make sure you visit our website at www.outlooken.org. That's www.outlooken.org. Or you can always call us for more information or to schedule any kind of an appointment at area code 531-365 5051. That's area code 531-365-5051. And don't forget to subscribe to our monthly newsletter so that you can find out when the next podcast is available. And we hope to see you then on the next edition of Outlook on Air.